Good morning, everyone. I've decided to give my presentation today as a pre-recorded video. For my presentation, I've decided to film a podcast. However, as the podcast is close to being an hour long, I'll not be able to play it for you. So instead, I've decided to go through the podcast and create a highlight reel, covering all the main topics discussed. So, what was the topic of my podcast? Well, the topic surrounded the idea around the black box problem. Now, what is the black box problem? Well, it's a concept where information is stored in a large database and then processed by a computer. A human then asks a question to the computer. The computer then searches through its large databases to return a result. The problem exists because the human doesn't know how the computer reached its conclusion, as the computer had access to large amounts of data. The main goal of the podcast was to see people's different perceptions of AI within their respective fields. The topics I covered were educational, medical, military, entertainment, and law. As I progress through my slideshow today, I'll give a brief introduction of the person I interviewed and explain why I chose to interview them. The last segment of my podcast deviates from the other portions of the traditional Q&A interview style questions. Instead of having a guest star to interview, I instead chose to do it as an analysis of AI within the field of law. With that out of the way, I hope you enjoy this brief presentation. My podcast's first guest star was Professor Duffy, who was interviewed for the education section. I chose to interview Professor Duffy as he is a current English professor at Pepperdine University. Now, within this segment, we talked about humanizers, or AI devices that are used to turn AI generative works into something that sounds more human. We then discussed the Turing test. The Turing test occurs when an AI interacts with a human. The goal of the AI or computer is to trick the human into making the human believe that that computer or AI is in fact human. If the human is unable to identify the robot or AI as a computer or robot, then it passes the Turing test. Within the course of our conversation, we also talked about factimization. Factimization is where a human interacts with another human, but is tricked and meant to believe that the opposing human is in fact AI. For this, we decided to look at the automated Amazon stores, which were in fact not operated by AI. Finally, as we wrapped up our discussion, we talked about the direction of AI and what we thought it was useful for. We came to the conclusion that AI is amazing for sifting through large amounts of data, but it should not be used to create final works or finished products. Throughout the course of my interview with Professor Duffy, I referenced a research article provided by the Education Council, which was a peer-reviewed article that looked into AI within the education atmosphere. The next person that I interviewed was Andrew Palmer. Although Andrew Palmer is no longer considering going down the medical path, his experience and understanding of the field offers a unique insight. Within our conversation, we talked about the Elsevier report, a document that looked into AI within the medical field. We then talked about whether or not we believed AI could replace a doctor. Through the course of our conversation, we looked at whether or not AI can make moral choices, whether or not the choices made by AI are accurate, which we found out were not due to false positives, and finally, we looked at whether or not AI can be trusted. As of now, we believe AI is useful for, once again, shifting through a lot of information and conducting analysis, but it's not accurate enough to make life-altering or life-changing decisions. For now, doctors still have a role within the medical field. For the next segment of our podcast, we looked at AI in terms of military. For this segment, I decided to interview Bobby Caridi and Robert Caridi. Bobby Caridi is a former U.S. Marine, while his son, Robert Caridi, is a current ROTC member in Missouri, as well as an active officer within the Las Vegas Civil Air Patrol. Within the conversation I had with both of them, we discussed morality, whether or not programmers have an unintended bias within the work, responsibilities of AI, and who should have the ultimate decision of releasing weapons. To help guide our conversation, I used a report created by the Department of Defense in 2023 during their investigation of AI within the military field. The conclusions of our conversation was that programmers need to implement moral safeguards within AI. The responsibility of AI should be limited to analysis and deploying defensive countermeasures. And ultimately, the decision for deploying weapons should be left to human users. Finally, I interviewed Tyler Simpson. He's an up-and-coming artist in Las Vegas and is the leader of a heavy metal band. For our conversation of AI within the entertainment industry, I used an NPR news article that dealt with AI deepfakes within the entertainment field. During the course of our conversation, we looked at deepfake technology in terms of the song Heart on My Sleeve to mimic voices, as well as visual deepfakes such as CGI resurrections in Star Wars. We also looked at how deepfake technology can be used in a malicious way to sexualize entertainers within the music industry. We also looked at the laws surrounding deepfake technology. Finally, by the end of our conversation, we came to the conclusion that AI cannot create or replace entertainers or artists within the music industry because AI does not have a soul, and a soul is what matters when creating music. Within the last segment, AI within the field of law, I looked back at the case Campbell versus A Cuffed Rose mentioned within the entertainment field. In this case, we looked at how there are some laws that can protect against deepfake technology, particularly when it's used for defamation. Now, during the rest of my analysis of AI in law, we looked at the potential benefits of having AI look through large amounts of information, conduct background information, and create preliminary drafts for motions. However, we also discussed how AI can create false positives or hallucinations, in terms of creating false court cases that never actually occurred. This is detrimental to lawyers who try to make a strong argument using facts. This example was found in an NPR research article. As we look back to the other segments of the podcast, we need to understand that AI is not pure evil. AI is trained based off datasets and is unfortunately susceptible to programming bias, whether it be intended or unintended. Now, we also learned that AI is not fully developed enough to replace humans in almost all of the aforementioned fields. Although AI is useful for sorting through large amount of information and creating background reports, it is not yet advanced far enough to replace humans within these fields. In conclusion, humans need to be the ones that make the ultimate choice. Although AI can help summarize and find background information for research, humans need to be the ones to make the moral decisions. With that completes my presentation today. But before we leave, I want to give a huge thank you and shout out to Professor Duffy, Andrew Palmer, Tyler Simpson, and both Robert and Bobby Caridi for helping me make this podcast.